again. And first of all, thank you very much for joining us today and devoting this time, next hour and a half, to this discussion and this workshop. I'm Luiz DaSilva. I'm the Executive Director of the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative. And I want to use a few minutes in the beginning of the workshop to tell you a little bit about CCI, if you're not familiar with CCI, as well as what we're trying to accomplish today during this 1 hour and a half. This workshop is being co-organized by the Vinci Center at VCU and ICAT, the Institute for Creativity, Arts and Technology at Virginia Tech. I'm really grateful for the help that these two institutes are giving us. You'll hear from ICAT and the Vinci Center personnel a little bit later. So first of all, I want to say a few words about what the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative is. We are an initiative that's primarily funded by the Commonwealth of Virginia. And our role is to perform research, workforce development, and innovation. And our area of focus is the intersection between security, autonomy, and data. So we bring together a number of institutions across the entire state, and I'll show you all the institutions that are part of CCI. We have these three mission lines. So we do research, but we also want to show the impact of that research in terms of the innovation landscape and in terms of talent development. And again, the topic of research is this intersection of these three areas. So when we say autonomy or autonomous systems, what I'd like you to think about are robots and drones and autonomous vehicles. So cyber physical systems that interact with humans, that exist in the physical space. So they're not purely in virtual space, but they are connected. They're controlled by virtual systems, by software, and they're increasingly becoming part of our day-to-day, right? So drones to deliver goods, cars, and transportation in general that embeds more and more autonomy, etc. So that's one of the areas. The other area is data. So that's kind of a prerequisite for autonomy. So machine learning, artificial intelligence, are used virtually for everything nowadays, but certainly without that, you cannot really have autonomous systems. And then security, which plays into both of the other two circles. So to really deploy these cyber physical systems in real space to interact with us requires a very high degree of security. And similarly, to use artificial intelligence requires what we call AI assurance or trustworthy AI. So the mechanisms and the tools to give enough assurance that these artificial intelligence systems are safe to use and do not provide outcomes that are dangerous or that are biased and so on. So we focus on the intersection of these three things. I think a lot of technology development right now really is around these questions, not only of these individual questions of security or AI or autonomy, but where these three things really intersect. I do think that we may be experiencing a revolution right now, similar to the one that we saw with the advent of the internet, with really having to coexist with these cyber physical systems in our day-to-day. So what we decided to do and why we convened this group and really want to reach out to researchers in the arts and design across Virginia is we want to have a program in CCI that brings together our research in these technical areas and activities in the arts and design that are complementary to what we have currently been doing, and just bring these two communities together on a program that's open to all researchers in CCI. And what you're seeing on the map is all of the institutions of higher education across Virginia that are part of CCI. So when we talk about the program, we mean one that would be open for submission of proposals from researchers from any of these institutions. It really includes virtually every university in Virginia, with one exception, and many of the community colleges across the state. And the idea is that this program that we anticipate we will launch towards the end of the fall would give the community a challenge. And that challenge, the way that we're currently thinking about the challenge is how might we reimagine and depict the results of cybersecurity research, and in particular the cybersecurity research that goes on at in CCI, either for scientific purposes, so how do we depict some of these results in a way that helps the scientific understanding of the research questions, or for creative arts practice purposes. And we would like these proposals to be led by faculty and researchers in the arts and design. So the way that concretely we imagine the program is we would launch a call for proposals that would enable researchers to apply for the program and then obtain some funding for a project that reimagines or depicts the results of the CCI research in new and creative ways. So what we want to do today is, first of all, we want to inform some of the community that hasn't engaged in CCI yet about what CCI is doing. So we have invited some CCI researchers to talk a little bit about their current work in CCI, and that serves as some examples of some of the research that we're currently engaged in. So that's the first objective, is to really inform this broader community about what's going on in CCI. And the second objective is to get input from the arts and design research community that will guide us in designing this call for proposals that we expect to launch later in the fall. So here I will talk a little bit about the structure of the workshop today and how the structure is really targeting these two objectives. Before that, I want to give a couple of examples of how, what would be the end result of these proposals or this program that we are planning. So we're planning a program, the researchers in the arts and design we anticipate would apply and present their proposals of what they want to do. And then at the end of that research, there would be a piece of art or a piece of design that has been created. And I don't want to bias too much the kind of proposals that people might think about, because of course you bring your own creativity that's much greater than mine about what is possible. But just to give you a couple of examples of things that I have run across that would be at this intersection between the CCI areas of interest in the arts and design. I should also mention that I'm being really influenced by my previous experience, because before joining CCI, I was actually spending a number of years in Dublin, at Trinity College Dublin, and we often engaged with the arts community. We usually had an artist embedded in our research center, and Trinity College Dublin operates a science gallery, which is an art gallery that really has exhibits that are aligned with scientific questions. So this has impacted me, and then the further conversations with people like Ben Knapp that you're going to hear from shortly have also influenced me. So let me give you a couple of examples of things that I have run across that are at this intersection. So the first example I want to give is this website called I Know Where Your Cat Lives. And it's really a commentary on privacy and the kind of information that we reveal when we post things publicly to social media or on the internet. So it's a collection of pictures of cats, and they can kind of give you a random cat, and they tell you exactly where the cat lives. And that's information that they can extract from the metadata that accompanies the image that you have uploaded of your picture of your cat to some social media. I thought it was a very creative way to talk about privacy online. And also it has an educational component, because if you see your cat on the website and you want to protect the cat's privacy and remove the picture, they tell you how to change the metadata that you make available publicly so that they no longer can detect the location of the cat, and therefore the cat will disappear from their database. And I want to give a second example, which comes from a data and design studio in the Netherlands called Architecture of Radio. And what this one is, it's really an app that runs on iOS or Android platforms, where they depict the wireless network environment where we are immersed all the time, right? So we are surrounded by Wi-Fi networks and 4G networks and 5G networks, etc. And what this project seeks to do is to depict that. So you can actually point your iPad to an area of your room, and it will tell you what kind of networks exist in that area in a visual way. So it's another example of taking, some of the research areas of interest to CCI, for example, 5G security, and depicting it in a novel way. Okay, so these are examples of what we foresee as maybe some of the outcomes of this program. Now back to today's agenda. So to reach those two objectives, one, to inform the broader community about what's going on in CCI, the other, seek input from the community. I'm going to wrap up my part. I've already spoken for more than 10 minutes. I will ask Ben Knapp, who is the director of ICAT, to say a few words, and then we'll move on to very short presentations by 5 CCI researchers from across the state. So they represent 4 different universities in CCI. And we gave them a really tough challenge, which is to present their research, the research that they've been working on for years in some cases, in 5 minutes. So they need to be extremely concise, and we'll have a little bit of opportunity to have questions in between any 2 of these researchers. So if you have any questions there, as they start speaking, please post to the chat room, and we'll probably have time only for 1 question or so, but we can pick from the ones that are posted in the chat room. And then we'll spend most of our time, or at least half of our time today, in a guided discussion led by Allison Schumacher from the Vinci Center at VCU. That's a typo here. Not told you, but VCU. Allison has been great, enormous help in putting together this workshop, and I'll introduce her a little bit later. So huge thanks to the Vinci Center at VCU and to ICAT at Virginia Tech for being such amazing partners in organizing this. So I will ask Ben Knapp to say a few words before we move on to our CCI researchers. Ben, you have the floor now.
Thanks, Luiz. And I want to say a huge thank you to you. When Luiz and I first started chatting about this, I'm always used to engineering and science researchers saying, what the heck are you talking about? And with Luiz, it was exactly the opposite. Wow, yes, I've already been thinking about this. This is a great idea. And it really, really is. What I think about this is this is really a project about human-centered arts and design integration and integrative research. And that's what we're really charging all of you to do. Today, as Luiz said, is a process of co-creation. We could have simply just said, okay, here's a call, but we wanted to know really from this community at large, what would be the best format for the call? What ideas should we be really asking folks to explore and to propose? So I also appreciate everybody that's here today for participating in this ideation. a lot of work right now across the country is looking at this idea of arts and design integrative activities, really injecting and introducing the creative process into areas of research that traditionally have not had researchers involved in that. And you know, a good example of this, ICAT itself has on its board a couple members. One member is from Bell Labs, and his role at Bell Labs, he reports directly to the CEO of Bell Labs. And his work there is to do what we're trying to do today. His work at Bell Labs is to introduce creativity, the creative process, human-centered, humanist ideas to projects. Why? Well, frankly, to make more money for Bell Labs, because these ideas create better projects and better discovery. And so he's an example. We have an example on ICAT's board doing exactly the same work for Microsoft Research. So again, this is what we really, really wanted to instill and instantiate within CCI, is this kind of approach. And I'll finish with saying that, you know, I say an awful lot that when people talk about arts integrated research, arts and design work, a lot of the conversation, rightly so, is about data visualization, data exploration. That should be parts of the conversation today, but it also should be much, much more than that. And I'll give you an example of a conversation that's going on right now at Virginia Tech. We have a team at Virginia Tech looking at 5G, and specifically looking at latency, so that multiple people can talk at the same time, doing what we're doing now, connecting different places in a very, very synchronous, low latency, low jitter kind of way. And the example and the people that they're working with are actually music performers. Why? Because music performance is a critical example of where there is no tolerance for jitter and latency. So the artists are working on this all the time, and who in a string quartet is lead and who follows, and all of those help inform the AI that they're trying to establish to actually solve this problem of synchronous 5G. So it's actually the performers that are embedded in the actual research as co-creators of that project. And the outcome of that project is both compositional as well as new innovations in AI for real-time 5G. So I just wanted to throw that out as an example. And as Luiz said, I don't want to bias everybody's approaches. I just wanted to say there's many, many more ways of thinking of this beyond data visualization, data exploration. So with that, I just wanted to kind of give that charge and turn it back over, Luiz, to you.
Thank you very much, Ben. And the example that you gave is a perfect segue for our first speaker. So I'll be giving very, very short introductions in the interest of time. And Vijay, you're the first one. So feel free to share your screen with everyone. So our first speaker is Vijay Shah, and he's a research assistant professor at Virginia Tech. So I'll give the floor to you, Vijay. We were seeing your screen. Yeah, I think that's it again.
Yeah, hi, hello everyone. So here at Virginia Tech, we mostly focus at ultra reliable, low latency communication use case of 5G. And Ben just did a great prelude for what I'm going to present next. So here we focus on a number of efforts. As you can see here, we have a lot of things going on at the intersection of 5G and AI machine learning approaches. But here I would like to talk about these two particular use cases, which is 5G for power grid and the vehicular network. So these are the two use cases which are at focus UR LLC kind of application at Blacksburg campus. On the vehicular side, we are still talking with our carrier providers, for example, AT&T. So it's still an ongoing process, but at the power grid side, we have made some good progress, which I'm going to talk in the next slide. And the next one is the network music performance, which Dr. Ben actually talked about. Here we are looking at how these musicians can play together. So I'm going to talk a little about that in the next slide. So on the power grid side, here the first approach is just to connect the grid system which we have at the Power and Energy Center in Blacksburg campus, and through the internet to the 5G testbed, which is at the CCI hub. And here the application we are focusing on is the monitoring and the control application. And as you can see here, the latency has to be as low as 1 millisecond, and the reliability is pretty high. It's 99.99%, which is 4 nines. So you can only lose one packet out of 100,000 packets, right? So this is the kind of application we are working on here. We have made significant progress, as I said, but depending upon, like in the second phase, we are going to replicate this 5G testbed at the Blacksburg campus and see if we can reduce the latency even further, because there are applications or use cases which requires less than 1 millisecond. So this one is the network music performance. Here, obviously, the objective is to have 0 latency demand, which is literally like less than 20 milliseconds. It cannot be 0. So by definition, it's a real-time interaction over the network, over the wireless network, that will enable musicians in different locations from their home to perform as if they are in the same room. And here we are looking at this use case of string quartet. The reason is because it's a very simple setting. We have just 4 players, and we have made some interesting observation in the last few months that we are working on. We saw that this very simple AI technique like LSTM, it was able to predict pretty reliably up to 10 seconds of the cello player. So we are only looking at the cello for now. So there are this couple of students of Dr. Ben who are working with us. They provided us this multiple data set, and we saw that we are doing pretty well. So the next step will be to go and look at the collaboration aspect of it. So in general, there are a lot of 5G capabilities. Right now, we are, like I said, we are focusing more on the AI aspect of it. But beside that, we have the concept of network slicing. That basically means dedicated slice for one particular application. So that is the case in the power grid. We are looking at the network slice. For the power grid, we call it energy slice or power slice. We can have similar funda for the real-time audio video streaming. Similarly, scheduling is the other aspect of it. And there are several work that are looking at how you can schedule this URLLC kind of application compared to very simple video streaming, which doesn't need low latency communication. There are these new concepts of information freshness, which are proven in the recent years that it is a much better metric than minimizing latency or maximizing throughput. And we have done significant work on this domain. And we have shown that in vehicular networks, it helps a lot in how you control the BSM or the safety message rates. There are several other approaches like faster handover, advanced channel coding scheme, using AI machine learning approach to predict in advance and manage the incoming traffic or jitter, use this mobile edge computing, which will definitely reduce the time. So that's all, thank you.
Thank you so much, Vijay. So if you can stop sharing your screen, maybe Sachin can start sharing his. So Vijay, as you saw, is really focusing on this problem of communication with very low latency that will enable a number of different applications. And he's talking about transportation, the distributed performance by a group of musicians as another example that Ben had alluded to. So you will have opportunities to interact with each of these researchers in our discussion phase, but let's move on to the second CCI researcher, who is Sachin Shetty. He is the Associate Director for the Virginia Modeling, Analysis, and Simulation Center at ODU, and is also a fellow of the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative. So Sachin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Luiz, and good morning, everybody. So So I'm going to talk about this work that my team has been working since 2015 on cyber risk scoring and mitigation. So this is an effort that has been funded by the Department of Energy and Department of Homeland Security also. So let's focus on the problem, right? I always tell my students, let's find out what problem are we solving? And so at various organizations, you have these security operations centers where they're responsible for monitoring your infrastructure and identifying where you have issues from a cyber perspective. The challenge is they're always overloaded with alerts and threat vectors, and they just can't keep up. And so with so many interconnections, we had to come up with a way to help them. So there are two approaches. First, assess the risk, and then come up with a prioritized mitigation plan. You cannot solve all problems, but how do you assess where your main pain point is and prioritize your mitigation strategies so that you can hit those pain points earlier on and then work towards addressing other aspects as time and money allows. So those are the twin objectives of our research. So moving further, it comes down to two things. We got to measure the risk, and we also need to put a price to it. I don't know how many of you know about the area of cyber insurance. So there's not a lot known about what is the cost that I have to incur to protect my infrastructure. And if I don't do anything, what will be the cost to my partners or my stakeholders? And try to break it down. How much cost should I put on detecting versus how much cost should I put on just forensics, figuring out where exactly the bad actor is coming from, or prevention, where the balance lies in, or just mitigation strategies, right? And if I don't do any of these, what would be the impact, right? Being able to visualize it, the security visualization sector needs a lot of help, whether it's data theft, business interruption, damage to property, and revenue loss. If you don't see it, you're not going to mitigate, your mitigation strategies are not well influenced. So you need the metrics to help influence your mitigation strategies. So we have started working on it. I remember I had a presentation for a CEO, trying to take all the data that we're gathering and presenting it, and I've been struggling with the best visual metaphor. So this is one I came up with, and it started resonating. Let's see, as Luiz said, you got the cyber, you got the physical, and you have the organization culture as well. So where do I start, monitoring my knobs, right? Where am I weak at? Do I have enough resources? Am I robust enough across these three dimensions, right? And so is my culture the problem? Or don't have appropriate physical access? Or my cyber infrastructure needs better tools, right? So what's the best way to provide the visibility to the CEOs and the CIOs so that they can invest their dollars into appropriate areas, whether it's the physical, the technological, or the organizational policies. So that's something that we have been working on. And so to give you an analogy, everybody has a credit score, right? We need a security score. So for example, the credit score helps us assess your financial stability, but a security score is going to tell me, well, do I need to do business with vendor A or vendor B? Who is better in terms of minimizing my risk? And so once I know that, in a credit score analogy, if I know my score is 500, what do I do to take from 500 to 700? What are the three things I should do? And same thing with security score. I know my security score is not good, but what should I do to make it better? And so that's the type of research that we're working on, not just telling you your baseline score, but also helping you, navigate how you can get better in improving your score and how do you invest your resources in achieving that. So that has been most of the work, and we have been working on this visual metaphors, and I think we can do better in trying to pinpoint where the problem lies and how to address it. So in summary, 3 pillars of my research. How do you assess the risk? So that boils down to how to measure and how to price the impact. So that is the technology piece and the business piece, right? That relation is not well known. Finding out where are we most vulnerable. Is it my physical access? Do I just put some biometrics and that's going to take care of it? So that might be investment as well. And once we figure out the assessment, what is the remediation? Where do I prioritize allocation of resources? Which of my assets need the most protection when I'm talking about doing business with my stakeholders? And once you figure that out, when I talk to my power friends, they say, what should I do to keep the lights on? So that's operational resilience. So what are the minimum things I should do or optimal things I should do to maintain operations, and where do I allocate my security dollars? So that would be those three pillars, and we definitely need better visual metaphors to help influence this, because we have a lot of data, a lot of results that require that level of analysis. So let me just stop right there. I know my 5 minutes is up, so I'll be happy to take any questions later on.
Thank you so much, Sachin. So Sachin focuses on this question of how to assess and quantify risk and manage risk related to cybersecurity. Jim, if you want to start sharing, great. So our next speaker is Dr. Jim Jones. He's an associate professor in ECE at George Mason University. So Jim, you have the floor.
Great, thanks, Luis. Really a pleasure to be here. I appreciate all of you and your time. Very excited about the potential for collaboration. So I'm going to provide one background slide to kind of lead into the work that we're doing. When you or anyone writes digital content to a digital device, so a picture, for example, and then you delete that file, the contents of the file do not go away immediately. And some of you may or may not know this. What actually happens is the computer or the device is told that space is available. And when the computer or device needs to use it, it will write over pieces of it over time. So in the picture on the screen, you can see that as time goes off to the right, parts of this digital picture are overwritten, but parts remain. And it's those remaining parts that are the focus of our research. A good analogy is a whiteboard that you've filled up with content. You're done with it. You need to write something new. Instead of erasing the whole whiteboard, you just erase one small piece and write in that spot. That's what happens on most digital devices. So at this point, you might say, that's nice, Jim, so what? This is what I've spent the last 5 years doing, so I'm going to try to share the so what. Turns out that criminals, and everyone else, but criminals is a good focus of our work, leave digital evidence behind, and they know this, so they try to delete the digital evidence before losing a device, sharing it, or leaving it somewhere it might get confiscated. Historically, investigators have looked for the entire file. So if there's a JPEG image that the investigator cares about, they look for the JPEG image. If they don't find it, they call it not found. What we've been working on is, what can we say about these residual pieces that are hanging around afterwards that helps us infer the presence of the whole file? And in the context of some of our CCI work with, for example, autonomous vehicles, attacks, deliberate cyber attacks, and malfunctions in autonomous vehicles leave digital clues behind. But very often, for the reasons of damage or possibly actions by the attacker, those digital artifacts might get partially overwritten. And so the ability to pull off pieces of it and draw inferences is very important. Also has direct relation to privacy. If you think you've deleted that credit card transaction, but in fact you haven't, or your old tax returns, that data may still be lying around. So if we can recover these fragments of files and say things about them, what does that actually allow us to do? In the graphic labeled A on the left there, we recovered a very small snippet of an audio file from a digital voice recorder, and were able to play that small snippet. So the audio file had been deleted, had been partially overwritten over time, actually several times, and this little snippet remained that when we played it, we could tell what the original recording was about. In the graphic labeled B, we've extended that idea to say, okay, if I can tell about one file being there, can I tell about multiple files and say something interesting like this computer used to have a particular application? Applications are made up of multiple files. So if we find multiple pieces of multiple files, we say something interesting about the app. And then in the graphic labeled C, extend this idea to a network of users. So imagine that I find a fragment and I can say, this device had this fragment, that's interesting. If I can say all these different devices had fragments of the same file, the line labeled 2, that's also interesting. if I can say that about a lot of different files and a lot of different devices, I can start to tease out the network of digital communication between an enterprise. In some of the work we're doing, it has to do with criminal organizations, but also any cyber attack that's perpetrated by a network of operators or over a network of systems like cars, for example. So in the last two slides here, I have some visualizations which I hope will reinforce just how much help my team and I need in terms of arts and design folks. So on the far left, 1A, all the one pictures, those are decay curves for files. So the files are intact at the far left. As time went by, pieces of the file got overwritten and you can see how much is left. What we care about is that little blue arrow down in the graphic 1C that says, even after deletion and a bunch of overwrites, pieces of a lot of files survived. And we can say some interesting things about that. And the graphic 2 is a picture, a visual representation of what a recovered partial file looks like on the disk. So the black boxes are where we found the file, white boxes are where we didn't, and we can kind of see that pattern of survivability. That pattern of survivability we tried to represent here. Each of these graphics, A through H, represents a single file, and it represents how the file survived over time. So if you imagine that that first column that's all blue in each of these pictures is the original file, everything's still there. And as you move through time from left to right, those blue boxes turn red when the original data gets overwritten. So if you have blue boxes on the far right of each of these pictures, that means that piece of the file survived. And what we learned was that files survive in very different ways, and that matters. To one of the earlier comments about the metadata, earlier presentations, the CAT project, the metadata matters. It tells you where the picture was taken. It tells you how to decode the picture in many cases. And so if we lose the start of the file, we lose that information. At the same time, the useful stuff usually down in the middle of the file, and sometimes we keep it, sometimes we lose it. So basically, I'm a digital archaeologist and would love the opportunity to collaborate and talk about opportunities.
Jim, thanks for that fascinating look into forensics, I guess, and digital archaeology as you described it, and very, very interesting. So our next speaker is Dr. Tam Chantem. She's an associate professor in EC at Virginia Tech. And Tam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Luis, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. So today I would like to introduce you very briefly to my research, which is on resilient time-sensitive systems. So time-sensitive systems, which are technically known as real-time systems, essentially are everywhere, even though we might not think of them. And they are especially important now that we have never before interacted so closely with this system. As you can see here, a vehicle now has perhaps 150 electronic control units or small computers inside of them. You think of your smartphone, or even perhaps a ventilator or other medical devices. So it's not just typical computers or iPads that you think of in terms of time-sensitive systems. And these systems are very unique in the sense that you expect the correct behavior, but also at the right time. So for instance, if I'm driving a car and I want the car to stop, it does me no good if the car stops after I have already collided into the tree in front of me, for instance. And so this is why real-time systems are very unique, but they are also difficult to design, because in order to get the correct functionality, you need the right hardware and software. But as these devices also interact, so intimately with our life now, we do have to balance between, what the systems can do for you and the security of this. And I'm sure you guys have, heard so much about cybersecurity issues in the past, on the grid, even in your pacemaker. And what I'm most interested in is the resource management part of all of this. So SWAP here is size, weight, and power constraints. And essentially, I can design a very secure system, very powerful, perhaps pacemaker, that is, that you cannot get into, but perhaps which cannot be carried around with you because they are too big. And so what I'm really interested in this respect is how does human interactions with these everyday devices help shape their design? And also, can we prevent some kind of vulnerability simply by the way that we design the interface or the interaction with the systems? So for instance, as I mentioned before, a vehicle now has hundreds of low computers inside of them. But are there ways that we can redesign perhaps the interface, the way the user may request, say, the windshield wiper to activate in such a way that it is safe for them, but also that would require fewer resources. And in terms of form factors, this is also very interesting because, and I'm sure you all have heard about, automated vehicles and autonomous driving. If vehicles can now no longer collide with each other, in theory, we may not need to design vehicles in the way that, with like heavy metal and big bumpers, right? So in some way, you can have a lot more creativity in the way that you design these devices in a way that are pleasing to the user, but also provide them with confidence. Okay? And to take that example further, even though system may become more and more autonomous, in the end, we still need that human in the loop. And so how can we design interfaces to such systems in such a way that the humans can not only pay attention to what's going on, but that they can make the decisions at the right time, okay? So back to my example with autonomous driving. In the worst case, the system, if it really cannot solve the issue on its own, it may have to rely on the human drivers or the human who is there. And so in that case, how can we make sure that the humans can react in a timely manner so that perhaps the vehicle doesn't collide? And how can we present them with all this functionality? So even though I'm talking a lot about, timeliness, I believe that the key in having really next generation devices is the way that we permit the interaction between the human and the computers. And so, so I believe that that's something that can really be explored, especially with your expertise. So I'm out of time now, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tam. So that's a great insight into these trade-offs between real-time, the requirements of real-time systems, and the security that's vital for these to work. Our last and certainly not the least speaker is Dr. Arsalan Heydarian. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Engineering Systems and the Environment at UVA. So Arsalan, please go ahead.
I think you guys can hear me now. Thanks, Luiz. So good morning, everyone. My name is Arsalan Heydarian, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Engineering at UVA. The project I'll be discussing is called the Living Link Lab, which is an NSF-funded research infrastructure. It's set up in a 17,000 square foot open office space with roughly 150 people living, working in this space, where we are trying to really understand how the changes in indoor environmental conditions impact residents' health, well-being, productivity, social interaction, use of space, different locations in the space. At the same time, through this work, we're exploring and developing novel approaches, technologies that we can enable the future smart building systems to collaborate with the occupants, enhance their well-being, increase their comfort levels, but at the same time, preserve their privacy, security, and safety. So the Living Link Lab research infrastructure really is divided into 3 layers of data collection, analytics, and feedback. So layer 1, data collection, we collect very detailed level of information within this space as far as indoor environmental conditions. So how does the temperature change? How does the humidity change? Air quality, noise level, light levels within the space. Meanwhile, we are also monitoring indoor occupancy patterns. So how do people use different areas within the space? We have some of our residents also wear wearable devices where we track their activities such as movement, heart rate variability, even skin temperature. We track some of their emotional states, the music they're sometimes listening to, and some of their productivity measures. We use a lot of wearable devices, cameras, and surveys to collect this information. In a layer 2, as far as data processing and analytics go, we use advanced machine learning techniques to identify correlations between these modalities that we find, identify trends in certain behaviors that people have within the space. And then the last layer number 3, the orange line that you see here, is the user interface. So we provide feedback, targeted feedback back to the participants and users that we have within the space. So as I mentioned, we are collecting a lot of information from different modalities of data. Some of this information, for instance, as you can see in the video here, we can visualize real-time or historical changes of indoor conditions within the space. At the same time, we use similar techniques to identify where we have faulty sensors, where signal and connection of sensors to our network is disconnected, and we visualize that throughout the space. We collect heart rate data, a lot of physical and physiological information from participants. So we can identify the certain tasks that people are doing through the analytics. We can identify certain activities they're doing within the space. And we are running a lot of different experiments. One of the examples is that we try to understand how does color and light color brightness impacts the work you're doing within the space. So whether certain colors and brightness actually impacts you to help you to focus more on your work or be more engaged and so on. So as you can see, there's a lot of data we are collecting, but we are collecting a lot of personal and private information as well. So the main important thing that we are looking at is how can we preserve privacy of people, but collect all of this information in a right way. So the way the system is designed, we do intensive interviews and periodic surveys to understand people's awareness of privacy, to understand their concerns about it. Users have full access to changing their privacy settings in our user UI system. So who can access the data? How can that data be accessed? They can remove the data that's been collected from them. And what we basically do is we look at the relationship between modalities of data we have. We understand where the concerns of people are, and we know what type of data needs to be excluded to preserve the privacy of the people that are in the space. So say I'm collecting air quality data, I have CO2 information from your office, I know whether you are present in your office or not. So maybe that is a privacy concern to you, and I would remove that potentially from the system. So what we are doing within the bounds of CCI and as our CCI type project. So within our ultimate goal of this infrastructure is make it available, make the data streams available to the research community, to make it available to you guys or other people within the CCI community. But we can't just share raw data with people. We need to ensure that we preserve privacy of people somehow. So the way we are doing is we identify where privacy concerns are. We implement we generate synthetic data for those concerned privacy points. And we use real data to generate these synthetic data. So we preserve the privacy of people, but still we have really real-based models from the real data that we've collected. And at the end, through this approach, the broader research community can benefit from the data streams we are getting. We can, you can use this data streams to develop new projects, new algorithms, new technologies to send test within the smart building applications. And the residents' privacy are always preserved. So with that, I know I've given you a lot of information about the type of work we do, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Arsalan. This is really interesting. These issues of privacy in digital twins and kind of at this edge between the real world and the virtual world. So thank you, and thanks to all 5 CCI speakers for also being able to be so concise. I know that you all could talk for hours about your work. I'm going to turn it over to Allison Schumacher from the Vinci Center at VCU, and she's going to be our leader for the rest of the period for the next 40 minutes or so. I've only known Allison for a couple of weeks, but she already feels like a very valued contributor and collaborator for me. So Allison, I'm looking forward to the discussion led by you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Luiz. Hi, I'm Allison Schumacher. I'm Director of Academic Alchemy for the VCU Da Vinci Center for Innovation, backgrounds in design and entrepreneurship and product development. And the Da Vinci Center is pretty perfect to join into this particular group with CCI and the arts. We focus our curriculum on bringing together arts, business, engineering, humanities and sciences, and medical. And just knowing that when you bring really smart people to the table, we can solve some pretty complex problems all together and make some pretty innovative solutions. So for today, we are going to use an external program here that you can just access from your web browser. I just dropped a link into the group chat here, and I'm not certain if anyone here has ever used Miro. But this is a really great program that I've utilized to be able to teach virtually and be able to have my student teams work collaboratively and be able to see themselves or see each other while working in this space. So if you go to the chat and click on that link, it will take you to the Miro board. And for right now, I'm going to share my screen so you all can see where I'm at. Hold on a second. Here we go. Okay, so can everyone see my screen? Odd. Okay, thank you, Luiz. So this is the full Miro board and what we're working on today. So I'm just going to lead you around. For those who do not know how to use Miro or have never used it before, there's a little bit of a learning curve in terms of navigation, but there's a few things that you need to know. So usually scrolling on your mouse forward or backwards helps you zoom in or zoom out. For mine, it's pushing forward or pushing back, helps to zoom. There are, let's see, to be able to utilize anything that's already on this screen, these are Post-it notes. So I'm just going to zoom into our first question that we're going to work on. And if you zoom in here, you can grab a Post-it note simply by clicking and dragging it over and then double clicking, and you can type whatever you need into that space. Another option that you may need to know about is this little button right up here by my lovely yellow picture. This is if seeing 36 collaborators' cursors around the screen will drive you crazy, you can click off and on. So now I can see you all moving around Miro. But if you unclick that, everyone disappears and you only see your cursor. But you will see people moving objects around while you're there. So you can utilize this in any way. There's lots of options. I strongly suggest educators get a free version of this because it's pretty spectacular. And I'll let you kind of explore on your own time. But what we're going to do right now, we're going to focus on hopefully a question that hopefully you all are already inspired to answer. Given you just saw this incredibly interesting research, we would like to ask you, how might we combine cybersecurity research with art and design? So Luiz gave us a couple examples. And so these can be crazy ideas, these can be very practical ideas, but if there were any ideas that came into your mind as you were watching the researchers' presentations on how you think these two fields can intersect, we're going to do this for 5 minutes. Grab the teal or green Post-it notes and type in whatever you can and just add them to the box once you're done. Does that make sense? Do we have any questions? I don't have a look on the chat, but does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to start the timer down at the bottom. We're going to do this for 5 minutes, and then we will move on to another part. Okay, here we go. It looks like we're answering more than one question at a time, and that's okay. Keep going. A little less than 1 minute. Oop, time being up. All right, thank you. That was a pretty great brainstorm. I appreciate your effort in that. Is there anything that anyone would want to share with the group? Something, an idea that came up, maybe it stemmed from a question you had from one of the researchers.
Yeah, I have a question for Professor Arsalan. I'm not sure I pronounced it right. If I didn't, I apologize. So you spoke about data, about color and personal specific data. I'm just wondering whether that can be used for designing like interior spaces and things like that. We thought with the anonymity of the if you have the data in clubs to say like, okay, if I'm designing an interior space for Le Pen Quarterdin, I mean, obviously you see their background being Tuscany, dark ambient. So in a certain consumer group or in a certain demographic, you'll get that data, and then it can aid designers who design spaces like that to optimize the ambience, the colors, the looks, etc., etc.
Interesting. That sparked a thought in me too, Nwanga. An idea that as a person who suffers from migraines, being able to take biometric data to change for a product, to be able to change my own environment, dim the lights, reduce sound, those types of things, and for personalized systems at home. Anybody else?
I was thinking a little bit about at what point does the artist or designer come into the project? And I think that there are situations where the artist and designer comes in at the end, and they're sort of either given materials that come out of the research, or they're visualizing something. But then there's also a model where the artist is there from the beginning, or artist or designer, and they're mutually sharing thoughts and working and thinking and making together. So most of my reactions were trying to think of models where the artist and designer was part of the project from the start, and how do you create communities where you find those collaborations, because I think that can be challenging in a university.
I think so. If I may make a comment, Michael. I think that's a great point. Actually, we are planning this first program this year as a pilot, and I think there's room for proposals that do either one. So either jump into some research that has been ongoing and bring a completely different perspective, or start a new area of inquiry that hasn't started. And we would like it to be led by artists and designers rather than from the technology side. And also the other thing is my bigger intention is to really build community that will last much beyond this first program. Right? So this is just the first step in building and bringing this community together. And hopefully this will really expand into something much bigger. But yeah, I think right now, either one would be very welcome.
Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, I have one. This is Kevin Moberly from ODU. I put my things on the wrong board, but I moved them. What about video games? Video game design and development, because video games have a long history. And I think, for example, as a gamer, that my field is cyber insecurity, which is how to break rules, how to understand systems, how to break into systems. And they have a long history of that. And games are one of the oldest forms of art we have. And games put people in an effective relationship with technology. So would you be open to, I'm probably going to put a proposal on all this, this is a rhetorical question, but games and game design. Is anybody else here working on that?
So I can take that on. So yeah, we didn't get the opportunity to talk about all aspects of our other research. So I have a research going on. It uses game theory to understand adversarial interactions with your model. So we have a good model where we try to figure out, it's asymmetric warfare, right? And so we try to quantify where the asymmetry really lies in different situation scenarios. Does asymmetry lie because we have more opportunities for the attacker to get in, or do they have better capabilities to get in? So it's an intersection of opportunity, capability, and intent, and then figuring out the different perspective. And so that's another area of research. I've got a couple of PhD students who try to focus on that. And to your point, right, we are building this game theoretic concept, trying to quantify, whether the attacker, are we providing more opportunities to attackers? We play, I don't want to say games, but we try to figure out, is it better to just provide the attacker more opportunities, but put in fake resources? So you have some genuine resources and fake resources to the attacker. So you're expanding your attack surface, but then you're better defending yourself, because now the attacker doesn't know whether they are going down a critical asset or they're just running around in circles, right? So trying to figure out, is that a better way to improve yourself? Yeah, so there's a lot of fertile ground to explore that. And again, I can speak for myself, so at least I have ongoing work in that. But yeah, if we had all the time, as Luiz said, if we had hours, we could probably talk about this.
Thank you, that's fascinating. All right, anyone else? No? Okay. All right, so we're gonna kind of expand this a little. We were gonna use breakout rooms, but I think given the first round, we can do this as a group. So there are 3 other questions on this board, and there's one other thing that I want to point out. I'm going to share screen a little real quick, and then I will unshare before you start working. There's one other part to this board before we start going, and that is I did put an opportunity for people to share contact information in case we have a chance to make partnerships here. If there's some research or anything that you would like someone to reach out to you, or you would like to be able to reach out to others, there is an opportunity for you to leave your contact information here. It's not required by any means, but is an opportunity to leave there. I started off in case anybody wants to add it there. So for the second half of this, or for the next few minutes, let's look at the other 3 questions. I'm not entirely certain the backgrounds of every single person in this room, and some of these questions are going to be more aimed at artists and designers, others are a little bit more wide open. So for the next 5 minutes, I want you to read through these other questions. We have, how might we inspire university art and design researchers to engage with CCI research in their work? So what's the motivation? How can we help people? Oops, we got a box that wasn't locked. Here we go. I'll lock it for us. There we go. How do we inspire others to actually come together? So on both sides, how do we actually help people come together in these partnerships to write a proposal for this? Some already started answering number 3, really looking at what key elements do art and design researchers look for when applying for funding and resources. That's information that CCI doesn't necessarily have right now. And then for the last one, what resources do you actually need to conduct your research in this space? If you already integrate technology, or with your current practice that may not currently integrate technology, what are the things you need to be able to get going? So I'm just going to leave the board open for everyone to be able to reply to any question that they would like for the next 5 minutes. So I'm going to set a timer, and feel free to navigate to the question that is most important to you and start answering. All right, let's kick it off. Finish typing on your last note there, and I started peeking around. There's quite some interesting suggestions here, and very useful ones too. Let's see, let's find some. Looking at time is a really important thing. So the potential to maybe buy out a faculty member's time to be able to work on this research. Let's see, what else? I'm just kind of scrolling around the Miro board at this point. So someone posted funding for student support under, so you look for, under the key elements that you look for when applying for funding and research. So your, I'm not certain who wrote that since it's a guest, but does anyone want to expand upon any other post, either this one for funding for student support or anything else? Let's see. Some of them are quite short. The more information we have here, the better we understand your listing here, the more it will be helpful when writing for proposals, writing the prompt for proposals. Maybe a few people still typing. All right, well, I'm going to do what I do to my students then and call it out. See if anybody will respond.
Hey,
so,
Allison.
Yeah.
Allison, this is Holly from ICAT at Virginia Tech. My daughter just got home from school, so I wasn't able to chime in. But I wrote the one about funding for student support. So I know in doing ICAT proposals and sending those out internally across campus, that is something that is often very appealing for faculty, is the opportunity to fund students to help them with their research, both at the graduate and undergraduate level.
That was my next question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent.
So I think I also saw some people talk about time release, right? Or release from teaching. So not only funding of graduate students, but funding the more senior researcher as well. I think that's an important component. So time appears a lot in these comments, and it would be one of the things that we would be looking to fund. And we're going to try to time this so that we do the selection of the proposals in the spring with enough time for the projects to start taking place in the summer, in case summer time is of interest, especially for a 9-month faculty.
Yeah. There's some other connections I'm starting to see here. One, under those key elements, again, looking at a meaningful project or to solve a real problem to enhance quality of life, and then saw a similar one about human connection under question 2. So an opportunity to form human connection using data and to evoke emotion. So I'm not certain who put down the other one, but so when you're looking for a potential funding, you're looking to have the problem predefined or to be able to collaborate to help determine what that problem is. I'm not certain. Maybe that person's out here. So meaningful project, solve real problem, and enhance the quality of life. Who is that one? It's all anonymous, so nobody has to own up to it. But those are particularly interesting to me. I went to, actually for one of the researchers, I wanted to mention a project by Raphael Lozano-Hemmer, and it's a project called Pulse, and I saw it at the Hofheimer, I'm sorry, actually that's not the right one. It's the Hirshhorn Museum in DC. And it was an opportunity for participants to either grab onto a device or insert their finger into a piece of machinery that would then take their heartbeat and translate it into a pool of water that then was reflected up on a wall. And in another part of it had light bulbs coming down. So as your heartbeat transmitted, it slowly fades out the last person's heartbeat and brings yours into a visual environment. So dark room with just light bulbs that are hanging from the ceiling, and the entire room is then experiencing your heartburn or your heartbeat in both a visual and an audio form. And it did create a really powerful powerful response in most people who experienced it. So just another example of how data visualization can form into artwork. But our last presenter, I believe that was your research kind of connected for me in that particular art exhibit. All right. Anybody else want to elaborate or propose a question or an idea before we wrap up for the day?
Allison, I want to point out something, and I just typed this up in the last section number 4. I don't know where it necessarily goes, but about the students, something that we have at UVA, we are trying to encourage collaboration between medical school and engineering, and we have something called engineering and medicine. And one thing that has been very, very helpful for us is that, you know, we go in the hospital, we have to learn the terminology, learn the systems there, and there are embedding programs that our students are placed in the hospital, say for a short period of time or maybe a couple of weeks to just get familiar with things. And same goes with nurses, doctors that are being trained. They are getting embedded in engineering, like in the space that we're in, and they work next to us. So if an opportunity like that exists, I think between art and engineering would be very helpful, that these kind of embedded programs that students, faculty can go across the areas.
Okay, so being able to so would this be pre-proposal submission or?
It could be within it. So one of the requirements in engineering and medicine is that you have to say how you would embed your team within the other program. So, you know, it could be a proposal requirement on what is your embedding plan. And that's something we have to always describe.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. We have more popping up in the chat over here. Okay. What is, Michael Burkowski, the artist placement group, what is EAT? What is EAT?
Those are all different models of artists who are working with either different kinds of industries. I think EAT was engineering, maybe engineering, arts, and technology. I'm not sure if it was actually a acronym or not. But they're yeah, different models of where kind of what Arsalan was talking about is like being in the working environment, and not even like even before coming up with a problem to solve, just seeing how it works and seeing how, I mean, I think just by just listening to different disciplines talk about their research, you start to realize like what's different and then what's the same. And there's like a calibration that happens.
It's just something that's a bit more immersive than the brief of what we did today with the short presentations. Okay, that makes sense. All right, thank you all so much. Really appreciate your feedback and contribution. And now that we've used Miro, we have some documentation of those suggestions, and we're recording this, so we have all of the chat that's coming up as well. So very much appreciate your time. I'm going to turn it back over to Luiz for a closing. And yes, thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Allison. Well, first of all, thank you a million for all the ideas and for your time. It's the most valuable thing that we have to offer is our own time, right? So thank you for spending this hour and a half with us. I love a lot of what you all have come up with in the whiteboards. And I believe we will all have access to that whiteboard for in the future as well, right? So it will be there, and we can all access it after the workshop as well. We are going to then start working on this call for proposals, somewhat illuminated by what we discussed today. But if you all feel like we should do more of this sort of event or a different kind of event, even before the call for proposals, please let us know. Or if you have other ideas about how to keep these discussions going, besides, you know, Miro and contacting directly one another, we will be very happy to try to facilitate some of this team building between now and the time when the proposals are due. And I see these proposals as just some seed funding for much larger initiatives that can arise from this. And I really, really look forward to working with all of you and seeing what you will come up with in some of these projects. So just a big thank you for everyone. And Have a great weekend.
Great weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Susie, I think that went really well.
I think it did too. I can't stop recording. You have to make me back the host.
No, no problem. Luckily, it's easy to you know, to pull it together in the end, like to truncate the end of the presentation. So this isn't part of the recording.